I'm delighted to be with you here this evening to give you a bit of an update on where things stand with respect to the negotiations on the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. Well, I could start my story in a number of places, but I'm going to start my story here on the 29th of March this year, which was when we had the UK's official notification of its intention to leave the European Union. And this came in the form of a letter from the Prime Minister that was handed to the European Council President Donald Tusk, and this launched a 2-year window before the UK is set to leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019, with potentially a period of transition when it has left the European Union. Now, during that two-year period, there's the opportunity to agree the terms for what we hope will be an orderly withdrawal of the UK from the European Union, with an eye to that future relationship between the UK and the EU. So this is my starting point. The 29th of March 2017, that 2-year process has begun. So let us look at the negotiations themselves. Now, it's really important that we have very clearly fixed in our minds that there are 2 sets of negotiations. So we've got the first set of negotiations called the Article 50 negotiations, and this concerns the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. So moving the EU from a union of 28 member states to a union of 27 member states. And then the second set of negotiations, a distinct set of negotiations, concerns that future relationship between the European Union and the UK. Now, the UK government has been very, very keen, very swiftly, to kick on with this second set of negotiations, because one of their priorities is ensuring there's stability and certainty for business post-Brexit. However, the European Union has been very clear from the outset that these negotiations will take place not quite sequentially, but will begin with these Article 50 negotiations. When sufficient progress has been made, only then will we move on to that second set of negotiations. So with respect to the Article 50 negotiations, there are 3 key issues to be addressed. So first concerns citizens' rights, so that's EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU 27 member states. Then we have the nature of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It was when the UK leaves the European Union. If it also leaves the single market and the customs union, then there will be a hard border on the island of Ireland. And that presents significant challenges for the peace process and also for the economic health of both the north and south of the island. And finally, the financial settlement, and this is the amount of the money that the UK is required to give the European Union in order to honour its outstanding financial obligations. So obligations it's subscribed to as a member of the European Union. So those are the 3 issues that need to be addressed as part of the withdrawal agreement. And only when sufficient progress has been made on those 3 can we move on to that second set of negotiations. And it's to the heads of state and government of the EU 27 member states to decide when sufficient progress has been made. So it's to the European Council to decide. So that's the overview of the process of negotiations. So where are we now? Now, following, as I said, the launch of the story on the 29th of March, the first round of negotiations began in June this year. And what we've seen is, on a monthly basis, the meeting of David Davis and his team from the UK government and Michel Barnier and his team from the European Commission have been meeting to push ahead on that first phase negotiations. Now, I'm in the position now where I have to provide some sort of broad brushstroke kind of overview or characterisation of the negotiations that we've seen over the previous 6 months. And I think how I can best describe it is we've seen kind of fits and starts. It's certainly been overshadowed by political instability in the UK and a kind of a continued failure of the UK government to be able to really clearly articulate its preferred landing zone for Brexit, and also how it intends to get to this landing zone. Now, the European Commission has come across as being much more prepared, and also has become, over the months, increasingly exasperated with the UK, and this really reached a head in August this year. And now there is increasing concern, really, from the European Commission about the stability of the UK, of its negotiating partner, so of the UK government. Another striking thing about the negotiations, really, and something that I certainly didn't predict, was the unity of the EU 27 member states. And they have been unwaveringly unified. And this is unprecedented for anybody who's been following European politics. There are fractures and fragmentations all over the place, but not with respect to Brexit. They've presented a very, very unified front. So, where do things stand with respect to these negotiations? Well, it was hoped that at the October meeting of the European Council, so the summit meeting, that would be the opportunity to agree that sufficient progress had been made on those 3 points and to open up the second phase of negotiations. Unfortunately, that was not the case. All EU institutions agreed that sufficient progress had not been made. So that decision has been deferred to December. In fact, this decision is being made tomorrow and on Friday when the European Council meets. Now, they are going to make their decision based on a text that was agreed on Friday. So this text here, which is a joint text between the UK government and the European Commission, where they present an overview of the things that they have agreed as part of the first phase 1 negotiations. So it addresses these 3 key issues. So with respect to the 3, I'll give you a very broad overview. I won't go down into the details of these, but with respect to the rights of citizens, there's a broadly speaking, and I kind of qualify this, broadly speaking, the rights of EU citizens are maintained. There is a promise of a swift and easy process for EU citizens to register within the UK, and also there is a reassurance with respect to kind of the judicial oversight of the rights of EU citizens. And that is, has been sufficient for the European Commission. We come to the second with respect to Ireland and Northern Ireland, and this really, when you look through this text, this is the biggest fudge. The circle has not yet been squared. The can has been kicked down the road. However, there is an agreement that if no other agreement can be reached, then the UK government will ensure regulatory alignment with the European Union to ensure that continuation of a soft border on the island of Ireland. So the Irish government was satisfied with that, therefore the European Commission was satisfied with that. Finally, with respect to the financial settlement, and you can remember over previous months there's been a lot of political contestation around this. There's been no agreement on the amount of money. However, there's been an agreement on the methodology, and there's also been an agreement on how the UK will pay those instalments required to the European Union. And so based on this, the European Commission is recommending to the European Council that sufficient progress indeed has been made, and therefore it should open up into that second phase of negotiations. And we will find out over the coming days. And I will also note that the European Parliament, who has been very vocal as part of this process, they agreed a resolution today as well, supporting the European Commission's position, although with some qualifications. So, what have we got to look forward to? Now, it's important to note that for those of you who have been following the kind of political furore that has resulted in the creation of this text, that actually the hard work is yet to come. So the opening up of this second phase of negotiations is a start point. It's not an end point. So what we can look forward to over the coming, certainly over 2018 and into 2019 and beyond, are a number of ongoing negotiations. So the first concerns the withdrawal agreement itself, because this text that was agreed about the first phase of negotiations, this doesn't kind of dot all the I's and cross the T's. There are still outstanding issues to address, and as we all know, the devil is in the detail. When it comes to transition, now the Prime Minister has been very clear that she wants there to be a transition period, so from the relationship the UK and the European Union have now to the relationship in the future. And the European Union has been very clear about the offer of a transitional period. It has said, well, you can maintain the status quo, continued participation in the customs union, continued participation in the single market, however, no representation in the political institutions of the EU. Now, this is going to be a bitter pill for the Prime Minister to swallow, so look out for ongoing contestation around this in the early part of 2018. Now, when it comes to the future relationship, we've been focusing predominantly on the economy, and certainly that's a fundamental part of that future relationship between the UK and the European Union. However, it's not the only part of that relationship. So another really substantive matter is the issue of security, so that security relationship between the UK and the EU. And also there will be a number of programmes that the UK is likely to express its desire, a desired continuation, to continue to be part of. So including, for example, science and research. So in discussions of the future relationship, they're going to be very broad and wide-ranging, but the key focus will be on the economy and on security. Now, if we look at the nature of that economic relationship, so what trade relationship is going to exist between the UK and the European Union? The Prime Minister has called for a deep and special partnership between the UK and the European Union, and she wants a comprehensive free trade agreement of greater scope, I quote, of greater scope than we have ever previously seen before. Now, what the Prime Minister has called for is a special bespoke model that's been tailor-made for the UK and the European Union, and the European Union has quite simply said that is not on offer. There are a number of off-the-peg models, and they will form the basis of a discussion about the future trade relationship. Now, given the red lines that have been presented by the Prime Minister, there's only really one of the off-the-peg models that is on offer, and that is a Canada-style, we'll call it the Canada-style trade deal. And it was actually very recently that a trade deal was agreed between Canada and the European Union, and it was celebrated as being a very wide-ranging, comprehensive trade deal that focused, and this is quite important, that focused predominantly on goods. And this is the model that will be available to the UK as things currently stand. Now, David Davis, who is the UK's chief negotiator, has called for a Canada plus model. However, the European Union has been very firm in saying that these are options that are not on the table unless these red lines change. Okay, so this is where we are with respect to the Brexit negotiations. Hopefully by the end of this week we will have confirmation about the opening up of that second phase of negotiations, and look out for what will be happening next year. This is not where I want to leave you though, because something I'm very keen that we remain attentive to in the UK is the way in which the European Union is developing. Now, whilst we've been all embroiled in rather a Brexit fuzz in the UK since the referendum, it hasn't been quite the same thing over in Brussels. So after a period of immediate shock and certainly an emotional journey that took place within Brussels, the European Union was faced really with will you sink or will you swim, and they've chosen the swimming option. And have really rallied around a united EU 27 and a post-Brexit future. So in March this year, they launched an initiative called the Future of Europe, where we've seen a real re-engagement with what the European Union is, what it should be doing, what it shouldn't be doing, and how it should be doing these things. And this process is due to come to an end in 2019. So we can really see that for the European Union, Brexit has become, it really has become a side issue. So they have reconciled themselves with a future without the UK. So what I'm really keen to emphasise here is that life goes on in Brussels, and certainly there are challenges for the European Union. So not least we have Greece and the problems with the Eurozone. We have outstanding issues with Hungary, Poland and the rule of law. So these are real challenges for the European Union. However, there is a sense at the moment that the European Union is on the up, and it's putting trade at the heart of what it's doing, opening up trade negotiations with New Zealand and Australia. It's pushing forward with a single market in services and the digital agenda, and has just launched a pillar of social rights, and it's doing this now in mind without the UK. So I think it's very important that we acknowledge the shape of the organisation with which the UK will have a relationship. So we need to know what the European Union is going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years' time. And also we really need to squarely acknowledge that in the UK, everywhere you look politically, it's Brexit. However, in Brussels, that's simply not the case. And there I will leave you. Thank you.